Good morning.
Good morning, Lindsay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Thank you for running this.
Yeah, of course. We're happy to do it.
Okay. So I have a, excuse me, I have a question. It says, change your name.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I'll walk you through it.
Yeah.
So we just want to make sure that we can get everybody the resources after the Chalk Talk.
Okay.
And Zoom, sometimes your username isn't your full name. So if you could, at the bottom of your Zoom icons, there's one called Participants.
Yes.
If you click on that, it should open up a right bar that has everybody that is in the meeting with us.
Okay. I
Fine.
see.
Yeah. So that just helps us know who's here, and we just want to make sure we can get you everything that we know.
Yeah, no problem. It's just that doing that from the waiting rooms like requested seemed impossible.
That's good to know. Then we will no longer request that.
I can confirm you can't do that until you're in the actual video out of the waiting room.
Got it.
So I'm sorry, Lindsay. I see my name. What do you want me to do?
Yeah, if you hover over your name in that participants bar, you should get two options. One is mute and one is more. And if you click on more, you can click rename and just change your name to your first and last name.
Okay, thanks, sorry.
Yeah, no. If anyone has any questions or you can't figure it out and we've started, you can just in the chat write your first and last name. That also works. All right, let's see. Have anybody else waiting? No?
Do you want us on video or not?
Up to you.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. So now that we have the full names, the only other thing I just want to go over before I hand it over to Mike is that to make this a smooth presentation and more of how it would be as an in-person presentation, everybody is muted by default, but feel free to unmute yourself, or if there's a discussion area and Mike calls on people, please feel free to unmute yourself. It's just so that we can keep going. You do have a raise hand function to ask questions. It's also in that participants bar. And if you click that, it notifies Mike that you have a question and he can call on you. If you can't figure that out, that's no problem. We also have 2 CTRL staff in the chat box, so you can ask your questions there and we can relay them to Mike. And also, just so you know, we are recording this and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. So just as an FYI. So thank you all so much for coming. I'm gonna let Mike take over and I'll stop sharing my screen. So thank you all very much.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming. This is a nice turnout for the end of finals week. I don't know about you guys, but my finals week is stretching long with people needing a little more hand holding this year than normal, but is what it is. So onward into the summer. So I'm excited to get to talk to you all about some of what I like to do in the classroom and works well for me in using a suite of online tools for engaging a broader audience, I think, than at least I am capable of doing without such tools. So first of all, I've just chatted to everyone the first Google Doc that you should go into, and this is basically our agenda, and in lieu of, I don't have slides to show, this is going to be a little bit of a screen chaos, I'm sure, but this reflects my actual process in that one could say there is a downside in the chaos that I bring to the classroom, but there's also a lot going on. And so this is our guidepost. So once you're in here, and let the CTRL folks know probably, or try to raise your hand. I sometimes have trouble seeing the hand raised functions, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So the agenda for today is I'll kind of introduce a range of activities, kind of what the motivation is, what I actually do and why. And then we'll get right into it. I figure can't do one of these things without exposing you to the pros and the cons of doing this. And, you know, frankly, some of these online activities were pretty well suited to transition over to the COVID doing everything on Zoom world. Some less so, but you got to live and learn. And so we'll do one main activity after I show an example. And then we'll do another smaller, simpler activity, which will also kind of lead into discussion and kind of see what people are thinking about how they might use these tools and translate them and into their own classroom, as well as what pitfalls or stumbling blocks you foresee before even having really tried it. So that's the general agenda. We'll see how this all works out. So to take a step back, so I am an assistant professor in environmental science, but my background is all geography. And so I do a lot of mapping activities, not surprisingly. And so kind of the point of entry into all of these different online activities was actually in my remote sensing class. And so remote sensing is just like satellite imagery of the Earth for detecting environmental change, you know, more or less. And so it gets kind of complicated, kind of quickly, kind of technical. You have to use technical software, a lot of algorithms. And so I was looking for a more visual point of entry for the students for image interpretation that reduced the cognitive load and focused on what we actually wanted to get out of our class, which was use images to understand the patterns and process of ecological function and change. So I started using Google Earth, which I will show momentarily. You've all been on Google Maps, of course, at some point. This is just a more robust version of that. And that sort of spun into these other activities of, okay, we're gonna map some stuff, but then we might as well collect some data. And if I've got 15 to 20 people collecting data on some phenomenon, like urbanization is what I'll show, we might as well have it be crowdsourced, might as well make some trends, might as well be able to do some analyses in class, connect it back to course concepts, and go from there. Then we've actually accomplished something. So that's my point of entry in a more quantitative framework, quantitative and somewhat complex implementation of this. But I've since stepped back and I use a lot more simple implementations of Google Documents and Google Sheets and Google Slides in my less quantitative, for example, complex problems class as well. So just a quick poll. I'm gonna let Lindsay shoot out a poll here to all of you, just to get a quick sense of what, if anything, have you tried before? And this is kind of a limited sampling of the options. The results are flowing in. This is part of why I like this process. You get to just see the action happening, whether it be in a Zoom poll or inside of a Google Doc that's actively being edited. So we'll give about 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I wasn't in control of that, was I? So I did nothing. Lindsay has showed that. And so we're seeing that, okay, so a lot of people, 63% have used Blackboard. Maybe some of you have used both of these. Blackboard, some Google Sheets, decent proportion, some other online tool, and then some newbies. Okay, so there's some experience here with a lot of this stuff, and probably I'm guessing that advanced significantly in just the last 2 months out of necessity. Very good. So we can stop sharing that. So, my motivation, I talked about the original motivation here was this visual interpretation of imagery, but it's since changed to kind of to paint myself a little negatively, it would be to make up for my perceived lack of discussion, like free-form discussion abilities in the classroom. It was not a strength of mine as an undergrad, and I don't feel it's a strength of mine now necessarily. It's just, you know, facilitating and leading a free-form discussion and involving everyone in a productive manner has been something that has made me nervous through the years. And so introducing the structure of having students, you know, enter their thoughts into a document first or something like that has made me feel better about everyone's participation, and definitely legitimately broadens the participation because I know everyone is doing something. And then when we get together to report out on our findings on whatever the topic du jour was, I can just call in anybody because it's, you know, it's no longer the awkward cold call of someone who wasn't paying attention. So yeah, I'm in this motivation section, the third main bullet point here. So these, you know, less vocal students can participate, more structured but still synchronous contributions. We can conduct an entire research project in 30 minutes, which I'll show an example of that. And there's some more examples that you can link to below in this same document. And then I also have an example of gathering feedback for me in real time, which has been pretty useful. So some of my motivations, so let's get into the actual process here. So I've laid out my general anatomy of how I tend to do things. And this could be something that you think about as we go through here of which this may not be how you would want to do things. This is just how I've chosen and I will convey to you. So we start with a bit of pre-work on the part of the students. So they would do some sort of reading. I might have a bit of lecture to get the relevant concepts down. Number two is what I would call the, oh, can we see your bullet points? Steve asked, can we see your bullet points? All these bullet points are in that document that I linked, that you have the link to. I can also share my screen though, which would be a good idea. Let's see, one moment. Okay, so I'm in this general anatomy here, the online exercises. So number two is the chaos and confusion phase. So this is something that I think you have to embrace a little bit early on, is that students are going to start opening up these weird Google spreadsheets and documents and are going to feel initially overwhelmed. And it'll take a moment to kind of calm everyone down to get into the real work. Number three is the real work. So the data collection or the crowdsourcing phase. So frequently in a Google Doc or a spreadsheet, possibly in small groups or via Zoom. I've been doing breakout sessions. Step four is analysis and synthesis. So in these small groups, bringing what you found using your analysis, bringing it together, connecting it to concepts, answering some questions in a Blackboard quote unquote quiz, just an activity. And then finally I dissolve, hit the, collapse all those breakout rooms, bring everyone back into the main room, and we have a bit of report out. So this allows me to make sure that we're all on the same page about the learnings and try to make sure that this active learning method leads to the correct conclusions ultimately and the correct connections back to classroom concepts. So let me show a quick example, well, not super quick, my Google Earth example of this, kind of going through these steps. So this is my remote, this is my, no, sorry, this is not my remote sensing class. I've actually translated this to make this activity available to a gen ed environmental science class. So this is a class called Living on Earth. And I still focus on urbanization as a main concept because it's important and it's something that I'm interested in. So we are in the urban module of this course towards the end of the semester. So I'm showing you my Blackboard page here to give you an idea of the pre-work. And in this case, they would get a little, they would do a few readings about urbanization. I would have them download Google Earth Pro onto their desktops in advance to try to smooth over some of these software installation hiccups that can have along the way. I would then show, I don't have this here, but I would show a couple slides about the different definitions of urbanization. And I won't show that right now. That's a key point here. Urban can be defined as a city boundary, a metropolitan statistical area, or, and this one's important, a know it like you see it, kind of a built up density or of either buildings or of population that is really the one of the main contributors to the environmental issues of, for example, urban sprawl. So that lecture leads into our activity of, hey, let's analyze urban sprawl. Let's try to measure the city's growth in 2 different places. And there's some links here. One is to a data collection sheet for Las Vegas, and one is to a data collection sheet in Nanjing, China. So this is the chaos phase. Now people would open up these documents. So I will show you this is the data collection sheet for Las Vegas that students would open up, and it would be empty, and they would not know what to do, but that's okay. They wouldn't have to do anything yet. And I would say, claim a row. So type your name in somewhere so I know where you are collecting data. And then then I would show, okay, what are we actually doing here? And we're still in the chaos phase. Opening up Google Earth, I'd give them a little a training, and we'd say, all right, our objective is to see how Vegas has changed since 1984 to 2015. And to do this, we're going to analyze historical imagery. So I'm going to bring up my ability to look at historical imagery. I'm going to travel back in time to 1984. And just to show that again, it's a pretty dramatic change. So 1984 Vegas, 2016 Vegas, we're going to be mapping change in 5-year increments. And I would say, now it is time to, draw your city boundary. They would draw a city boundary a little more carefully than me. And we're in the data collection phase here. They would draw this boundary and they would take an estimate in square kilometers of the area. So we've got 289 square kilometers. And for 1984, I would enter that in. So this could take a while if it were just me, but I've got 25 to 30 students who are each picking 3 years to enter in, and the data collection adds up quickly. They're usually pretty good at it. There's one key thing here is just kind of monitoring the data collection in real time to make sure, for example, someone isn't entering in units, which makes calculations mess up. You know, there's a lot of other things that can go wrong depending on what sort of activity you're running. So fast forward, I put my cake in the oven. We take a commercial break and we come back and the cake is done. We've collected all the data. And so here is a real example from this year from my students in this class, in this Environmental Science 250. And so you can see they did a good job. They actually collected quite a bit of data over the different years from 1984 to 2015. And I've set up this spreadsheet. So down at the bottom, it does calculations automatically based on the student's data entry. And so we have a mean area of the city over time, and then the standard deviation. So the variation in city size simply based on the subjectivity of the data enterer. So this is, where it kind of gets into some interesting stuff about crowdsourcing and the variability and biases of the people who are entering the data. So they don't need to worry about doing any calculations. That part's on me. They then go over to this results tab and they see their trend. So they see their mean trend in urban growth. They can analyze when did it grow the fastest? When did it really take off? What's the percent growth in urban area over time? They can say, what is the standard deviation? And when did it look like crowdsourcing wasn't as useful as, it's the error bars are pretty narrow in 1995. Why is that? Error bars are a little wider after 2010. Why is that? So they would do this in small groups, and they would finally return back to, or while they were in small groups, they would return back to the kind of analysis and synthesis phase, which is this extended in-class activity. That's a little bit terrible acronym there. They would open that guy up while they're in class in their groups, and they would have to answer some questions. So questions about growth trends, questions about ecological meaning of this, questions about the differences between Nanjing, China and Las Vegas, and questions about the uncertainty of this process. So that kind of, I guess that would, to wrap this up, we would then bring everyone back into the main room and make sure everyone is up to speed, check on questions, discuss the key findings as they pertain to, for example, going back to these different ways of measuring the sizes of cities. And that would be about it. They ultimately will put some of this in a paper that they're writing, or it could find its way on a test depending on the class. I can take, if there's any questions, that's a little bit of a whirlwind intro tour. Chris, yes.
You used a Blackboard content area to lay out prior to the class all of the steps in which you wanted them to take, or did you give them an assignment, then work during class to create the next thing? Did you expose what was next in more of a real time, or was it all there way in advance?
By what was next, do you mean what was next during classroom time, or what they had to do after?
You had a layout of where they should go. You had some background material for downloading things. You had your questions all set up, all in the content area, one after the other. So they can see those a week, 3 days before class starts.
Right.
Or are you adding these as you go?
No, definitely before class. I introduced enough chaos with just this process overall. So to the extent that you can add the structure well in advance, that's great. If it's the first time running this class, it's going to be the night before that I'm adding this stuff. If I'm a little bit of a fine-tuned on this, so I can add it a week, a few days in advance, just to at least have, you want to make sure the readings are posted and stuff. And then some of the other things can be added later, like the actual, the step-by-step instructions for Google Earth or urban boundary drawing, et cetera.
So they can do that if they want to, well before class. I mean, they could see
They
it,
could
play with it for 2 or 3 or 4 days if they wanted.
Sure, they could. I doubt too many people are, other than perhaps opening up Google Earth and playing around, because some of the specifics of the data collection process are easier when I actually tell them. But yeah, you can. I try to put as much structure on Blackboard as possible. Lindsay, are you able to just tell me who the next person is?
Yeah, so we had a couple questions in the chat. A couple people are wondering, how would this work asynchronously? It seems like this is maybe a little easier with a synchronous class. Can you talk a little bit? Have you used this in an asynchronous situation?
Yes.
Okay.
So just more instructions. I would still want to give a video demo for sure. But then I've included this, so something similar to this, or maybe exactly this, is included as part of my remote sensing first lab. And so the students will actually do this on their own. So it's the part, I guess the part to note is that I have them do 95% of the lab over a certain period of time, and then say, don't make your conclusions about this final question relating to urban trend and standard deviation until the day before the lab is due, in order to give everyone time to add their crowdsourced information. So that's maybe the dance that you have to do.
Great,
I'd
thank
be
you.
happy to talk. I can translate probably most of these to asynchronous, but I'd be happy to talk about that later on.
Yeah. And then Juliet, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if you could say a little bit more about sort of what happens in breakout sessions, right? Because what I'm trying to figure out about how to manage those is sort of how much intervention you do, right? As the, are you sort of monitoring what's going on in the breakout groups? And then sort of how do you encourage them to work together?
So I think that's imperfect still, because I'm new to the breakout groups.
Yeah.
But so normally my breakout groups, I would have 6 to 8 breakout groups in a class of 30 students. I try to have like 3 to 4 students in a group generally, whatever that leads to.
Right.
And so I set them on their way, and then as quickly as possible, I try to just start popping in on every group. And I start with the group that I foresee is going to have the most trouble just getting started, and I visit them first. And I, make sure they're doing their stuff. And, when it's activity based, the interaction is a little more straightforward amongst the participants. They have a thing they need to accomplish. To some extent, they can do it on their own. If they run into issues, they can ask their friends in the group. When it's a little more freeform, I still think breakout groups suffer the same downsides as regular groups, where 2 out of 4 people are actively participating, and in the Zoom groups, it's like 2 out of 4 are muted and claim that their microphones don't work, and I have no idea what's going on, and I don't have a good solution for that yet.
Right.
But
it always feels quite awkward, sort of jumping into a group. I don't know. So I just wondered if you had any,
I just say it's
like
coming.
They're incredibly freaked out when all of a sudden I show up in their breakout group.
I just say I'm coming, and I just parachute in, and I hear what you're saying. I'll show. I'll show one strategy that I have for closely monitoring participation in our second activity. Actually, it's it's easier to watch everyone if everyone is in one Google document making updates at that time. Then you don't have to jump from group to group. Is it okay if I move on?
Yep, we're good. Thanks.
Right now? Okay, because I do want to do our main activity here, so you guys can try this. So the main activity is, let me grab a link to it here. Put this in the chat. Wait, where's the chat? Okay, I just shared with you all a document that you will need to go to. So this is actually the training phase for this Google Earth urbanization project I showed you. So it's training in that it's giving students some background, access denied, of course. This is restrictions and access is always something that you gotta watch out for. Let's make sure. Okay, I updated the permissions. Hopefully that works. See people in here. Okay, so we're going to train on how to interpret images. And so the pre-work in this case is real quick. You're going to follow this first link to the set of clues right here. So I'm going to do that too. So our goal is to interpret images and to say what basic clues you used to figure out what you're seeing. So for example, this is a Natural Resources Canada website. They just did a nice job of distilling this. So, you know, you're looking down at a satellite imagery, Google Earth, Google Maps, whatever. Things, I'm going to do this. This is going to be pretty quick. So the learning objective here is to not be an expert in image interpretation. You can use shape. You can use pattern to discern, say, plantation forest from natural forest in this case. Size of the thing. Are you looking at a highway versus a residential street? Tone and color. Lake versus sand. Shadow is an indication of three-dimensional structure. Is it a tall building? Is it a tall tree? Or is it just the ground? Texture. This is an important one. Spatial association. Are you just looking at a boat, or are you zoomed out so you know that that boat is near other port facilities, telling you that you're looking at a port or a dry dock? And how do things change over time? Okay, so these are some clues that you are going to use to interpret a few images. So now I'm going to go to the second link, the question. So now we're in the chaos phase where you start opening some things here. You can open the questions and the next one, well, and the next two really, the questions, the images, and the answer sheet. Oops. So our goal is to look at 9 images and answer some questions about them. So the 9 images are right here in this, again, questions link that you'll follow. And let's just look at one. So we're going to do the first one as a group. So this is kind of another thing, you know, start up with an example, of course. So I'm going to go to this images spreadsheet, or not spreadsheet, slides, Google Slides, of course, Google fanboy. So we look at this sort of abstract image where we don't really necessarily know what's going on. But what do we want to know? Well, we want to be able to describe the differences between the east and the west portion of this image and speculate as to why those differences exist. And then this is the key part for the learning objectives. What clues from that Natural Resources Canada document did you use to come to your conclusion? Okay, so it doesn't matter if you get the answer right. This is how did you arrive here? And so does anyone want to venture a guess as to what you're seeing here? And what the difference is between the west side and the east side of the image?
One side's grassy and the other side looks barren.
Okay, very good. So what clue did you use to discern that?
Color and texture.
Okay, yeah, color of the vegetation, of course, and the texture of the terrain?
Terrain, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, anyone have a guess as to why? Oh, I see one guess, the lee versus the windward versus leeward side of the mountain range. That's a pretty good guess, and I always get that guess. What's one clue that suggests that is not the case, though? Because what do you see that's separating the two sides of the image?
River?
There's some mountains and there.
River.
Yeah. There's a couple
of things
river that look like stream beds and some elevation.
Yeah, so you got stream bed, probably used a clue of shape to get to that one, the wiggly. I see that Robert has suggested that this is the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and we've got a winner. That's the case here. So it's deforestation on the Haiti side on the west versus less deforestation for various reasons that we will not get into on the right side. And so we've kind of gone over the clues: tone, color, shape, texture, etc. There's a lot of overlap that are relevant. One more quick one here. So the question is, what are you looking at around point A, and what clues did you use to come to your Cabs in queue. All right, we got it with color and shape. Anyone? A key that I want to point out here. That's completely valid. This is a JFK Airport. One thing I like to point out here is if you zoomed in even further on that image, you probably would have no idea what was going on because you need that spatial association. You need to be able to see the airplanes in order to know what the cars are. So that's the key take home here. Okay, so I'm gonna break you guys into groups. You're gonna go out into your breakout groups and you're going to try to do a few of these. I have not tried this. This is I never do this with a spreadsheet, so this one is new, but I wanted to see how this worked. So I'm trying this out on this big group here. In this spreadsheet, you will see your group number. I don't know how many groups there are going to be, less than 17. And you will see that you're associated with a question. So each group has, just try to do one or two. You're only associated with 2 questions. You're going to fill in the clue, so like tone, texture, and you're fill in the rest of the answer. So this is the structure that I'm trying to bring to this activity. So I'm just going to break you into groups. I will not have time to visit you because there's too many. So if you have a question, you can ping me, I think, still through chat. And then I will watch you fill out this spreadsheet, and then we'll reconvene and discuss a couple of these. So let me do.
Mike,
Yeah.
should we, each group is associated with an image, or which image should we look at?
Each group is going to be associated with a question. So you might have question 4, for example, if you are, it's the screen share thing getting in my way. If you are group 4, and that you just know because you'll get broken out into that group, you're going to have question 3. If you're group 8, you also have question 3.
But
Okay.
Which image should we work on? All of the images?
The questions are associated with the images.
Oh, okay.
So this is question 2. This is question 3 right here. You can see in the upper left corner. Good questions. So, why am I not seeing the breakout? Oh, that's manage participants, isn't it?
Mike, it might be under the more, the 3 dots, perhaps. Or what I can do is,
Can you do it?
I just made you the main host. Now can you see breakout?
Oh, I see it now. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, so you guys can probably still see me doing this here. So I'm gonna try to make it so there's like 3 to 4 people in a room. So I'll just do it randomly. That's how I usually do it. Sometimes I set it up, but that's too challenging for me. And see ya.
Great. Sarah's had to go to another meeting, so she's
Okay.
now in the
I'm used to a reasonable rate of attrition when it's like, oh, you find out that some of your students were actually not at their computers.
right. Hey Mike, can you do me a favor and if you hover over CTRL Lindsay Studer, can you make me a co-host?
In this breakout list?
Or
wait, oh, I see. Oh,
should be in the participants.
Yeah, I got it.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, just bringing people back from the breakout rooms. I think they get officially kicked out in 10 seconds. Okay, welcome back, everyone. There's some abrupt changes that happen, from parachuting in to dissolving the breakout room. I think you just got to get your students used to the fact that things are just going to happen sometimes, and that's just the way it is with the technology. So welcome back. You're seeing my screen now. We've got some good crowdsourced data entry. For example, on let's just look at question 3. So can I get somebody from group 4 tell us what they think they're seeing and what the clues were to get us to that conclusion?
Sure, this was Jen and Becca's group. We were looking at the drastic difference in color and obviously size, which made us think that it was, and the green of irrigated fields, and then also the lack of water in what appeared to be streams and other things to the left.
Okay, so color was a big one, and what was your other main clue?
Size also was one of them for us, and then the proximity to stripped water areas.
Okay, and then group 1, what were you concluding that you were actually seeing?
This is Valentina from group 1. The same, that it was some irrigated field in a desertic climate.
Yeah, so center pivot irrigation in Nevada, I think is what this is. This is a nice one with very clean shapes and colors. Okay, well, if we had more time, I would go through and we would visit all or most of these to get a better sense of what's going on, but not going to do that right now. But we'd be highlighting these clues, and then we would apply the same clues to students thinking about the urbanization mapping later on to try to say what is city versus not city when looking down from above. But we must move on. So I just want to take a few minutes and just show you a simpler example, because the one I have showed are a little more complicated. I don't want that to be daunting. But you can see that there are a number of examples that I've put up for you to look at. And some of the simple ones are, so the very simple are number 2 and number 4 in that list. And so you may have done some of these before in your own forms. But for number 2, that's just a simple Google Doc. And I think revisiting maybe Juliet's question about kind of monitoring participation, I found this to be really nice, simple way to do that. And so the example here is first day back from coronavirus close down. We did an air pollution. I had students get into groups, look up articles on how air pollution was changing due to shutting down the economy and no one moving around. So there's a ton of articles out there. It was really easy for them to find. And then they went into this simple document. This is what I had set up for them in advance. And they knew what group they were in. They just copied and pasted, updated their group number, they spent their data collection phase was finding some articles on the COVID versus air pollution relationship. They would decide in their group which one was their favorite. They would write down their group names, link to the article, answer a few questions that were pertinent to, because we were literally like studying air pollution that day. And so I could watch this document grow, and I will show you the final result here. So take the cake out of the oven. And this is what we had. So there were, like seven groups here, and everyone did a nice job. And this, found some articles. Some of them were the same article as other people, but like, that's okay. I don't think people aren't really like cheating or anything, or if they are, it doesn't matter that much. This is low stakes. So as long as they're like finding something useful out of this, discussing it, getting down to the mechanisms, and then we reconvene after this, and I can just call on people and say, tell me what you found. And then I can be monitoring along the way to see who has found different things. So we're not just, I'm not going to call on everybody because there'll be a lot of overlap in findings. I'll try to find some interesting nuggets along the way. Another simple one is the bottom-up lecture. So just like brief presentations on units. Frankly, I usually do this on like kind of units that I find simple and rather boring. And so it's just the students should have read the textbook on something, and then they need to produce a couple slides on it and present to their classmates. So actually I sometimes do it when I think the content is a little bit simple and boring, and sometimes it's actually a good way to make a visual argument about something. So the example that I'll show here is more the latter. Students read about smart cities, the pros and the cons, like privacy concerns versus efficiency. And they then came into class and I gave them this front slide here that says, here's what group you are, you're pro smart city, you're anti-smart city, you're pro gentrification, you're anti-gentrification. If anyone could really be pro gentrification, but whatever. They then say, make a bit of a visual argument. So it's not just a list of bullet points. And, people did some good stuff to tell a little bit of a story in a short period of time. And this actually students were somewhat passionate about their arguments for this particular exercise. And so this led to a nice, more free-form discussion afterward. But I've always got my structured crutch if I need it, if that free-form discussion is not forthcoming. Let me show one more here, and then you're welcome to look at any of the other ones and ask me about them. I did one activity in complex problems where I started, did the course for the first time, and then I asked everyone for feedback. On the same day that I think we did SETs or something. But the goal here was to figure out which activities they thought were useful and which were not. And I like to make things a little more complicated than they maybe need to be, but it's still fun. And so this was basically students claimed a row in this spreadsheet anonymously. So sometimes this is anonymous, sometimes it's not. And they then have a list of activities that we did that I was curious about how they were perceived. So these are a paper, point, counterpoint, agriculture, some readings, these Google Earth activities that I do. And I asked each student put in keep, modify, or toss. They can't toss everything. They can only toss a couple things. And if they modify or toss, they have to tell me why in these anonymous comments. And so this was nice because it led to, this auto-generates these charts. And so I immediately got some feedback of, of like, okay, this trip to this organic farm, everyone liked that. Great, we'll definitely do that next year. The Sabin readings, half the class wanted to get rid of those. And so then it was actually pretty easy to be like, listen, guys, we're comfortable with each other. You can tell me why you said you want to toss it. And people gave me some good constructive feedback on that as well. And I didn't toss them, but I significantly modified them for next time. So I ran the same thing again for the same class this past fall. And I like to think this indicates progress rather than just within class student variability, but it could be a little bit of both. And you can see that now with these modified activities, there's a lot more people who just elected to keep stuff. And some of the activities that other students liked best, like science fiction readings, actually this class did not like at all. So, you kind of learn stuff about your students and learn stuff about your content this way. So everyone's got their own way of doing this sort of thing. So this isn't that novel. It's just, I enjoyed the pie charts that come out of this. So I'm going to open up one more activity here. This is going to be in the simple vein. And so this is back in this activity 2, and we'll just take hopefully just like 5 minutes, just jump into this thing. And this is going to be answering a couple questions. This is like a meta activity where you will just copy and paste this as Anonymous Panda is doing right now. And with your group, just have a quick brainstorm about, kind of the take homes from what you would do or what you might be interested in doing to apply any of this stuff in your class. And so let me make these quick breakouts again. Well, we'll just throw people back. So it keeps the breakouts already the same. So I'll just throw you back in those.
Mike, there were a few questions in the chat. I just threw them to you on a private chat so you can look at them and address them later.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Lindsay, when I broadcast a message to everyone, do you get that message? Yeah, just is it just a chat? You're muted.
Thanks. Yeah, so when you send a chat, it automatically sends it to everybody, but you can privately send messages as well.
Yeah, I'm looking specifically at the broadcast a message to all functionality in the breakout rooms. I didn't know if that, because it's not called chat per se, but I didn't know if it still shows up in everyone's chat window.
It does.
Okay.
It shows up as like a little green alert.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Some of these messages I feel like I'm just sending out in the ether and I really don't know where they're going or who's seeing them.
They go to everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
At the end of the presentation, when you close out, can you stop sharing your screen so that I can share our social media handles?
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
If anyone wants to stay after, is that, and ask more questions, is that possible? Okay.
Yeah, that's the beauty of this, is we didn't reserve a room, so you can
Right.
stay as long as you like.
Right. Okay, I think the breakout rooms are closed, and we can still see the anonymous quagga is updating some information. And so this is, again, what I like about this is I can just see the activities in process, anonymous chinchilla, and and just course correct as we go. And sometimes that may mean I parachute into their breakout rooms, and sometimes I may just add a quick comment, depending on the format of the sheet, like right in MGA says, good job, right in there. So that, I'm gonna stop there for right now because I'll give a couple minutes. If we have a couple questions, let's do that. And then we should probably wrap up by around 10:45, but then I can stick around and answer any more questions as they come up, or talk about any of these other activities. Questions?
I have a question. Could you say more about the bottom-up lecture? Sort of what that looks like?
Sure. So bottom up just meaning that produced by students.
Right.
And then
yeah. Sorry, can you just say more about sort of how do you prompt them?
So in this case, here is the prompt basically on the smart cities. So you have read 4 articles or something like that in this case, some pro, some anti smart city. And then the prompt, your activity, your data collection phase is to go out and actually find visuals that supports your argument. And so, they kind of like that process. And then they need to be able to explain their visual and what sort of argument it's making. And so I usually, the prompt is usually 1 or 2 bullet points here on a slide. And then also, just something else that I'll give them a 5-minute lead in to what we're doing. I did another one here in my remote sensing class. And so this one is a little more structured, where they did an activity that classified some land cover. And then I tell them exactly what they need to be doing. So, here's what you need to be telling people. You need to communicate your scientific results to a chosen audience, which was a particular point of interest for this activity. So
yeah, I think I'm having trouble. I was really glad, sort of, for me as an art historian, the fact that your main activity was analyzing an image, that was like so great for me. And I could easily see how to adapt that. But this one, because we don't really have, it's hard to come up with clear pro and con, right? So I'm just trying to think about how would I adapt this type of activity to what I'm trying to do in the class.
Sure. It could always be more explanatory. I this complex problems class tends to focus on argument and viewpoints a lot, and so that just happens to be what I focus on. But this remote sensing example here is definitely, it's not really pros and cons. It's just, here's our results, and I would like you to present your general results and then dig in to something specific and interesting that went either good or bad about what you produced. And so that's what leads to the discussion such that it exists in this class.
Thank you.
Yep. Somebody had asked about assessment, and I think that is challenging, and there's a variety of options. How do you assess student learning? One way was that Blackboard activity that I showed. So those are graded activities where they need to synthesize, analyze, report out what they found in that urbanization process. So that's the quick and dirty way. Another way is we do a similar exercise in class, and then they have to do one on their own for a lab that gets graded. And another one is, they need to take their findings from measuring urbanization and include it in a paper. Or an interesting one is actually the sort of the flip side. Just show this one quick. This one's weird. This one's like, I don't know what you guys will think of this one, but I do a debate in a Google Doc. And so it's not a lectern style debate. It's students debating agricultural techniques, and they've already written their position papers on this. So they have information. I divide them up into groups. I put out a number of questions here, and I assign each group to be either kind of a point or counterpoint for each question. And so, for example, which farming technique is best for preservation of biodiversity writ large? I've got students then chiming in, making their key points from what they've learned, and then the other students countering those, and then maybe a third group of students from some other question can come in and just interject additional knowledge. And this all gets graded in and of itself, and I provide feedback in the document. So this one is like sort of experimental, but I think it worked pretty well. So I should probably stop and let Lindsay wrap up. I am here for the next, however many minutes to field any other questions, and I very much appreciate you coming. And hopefully this wasn't too all over the place, and you have access to the documents, or if not, I will get them out to you through Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike, and thank you everybody for joining us. I am going to just share my screen really quickly. So we are really trying to ramp up our efforts to get you all more information just in these crazy times of teleworking and teaching online. So I just wanted to share with you guys our social media handles. We'll talk about upcoming events, but we've also been really trying to find useful articles, things like how to handle being a parent and teaching online and teleworking, things like that. So please join us on social media. It's a really great resource, and I just wanted to share that with you all. So feel free to stick around. The great thing about being online is we didn't reserve a room, so you can stay and ask Mike any questions you may have. And thank you all for joining. I will be sending out an email with Mike's resources and an evaluation. So thank you very much.